to meet you, and the wind be on your back. May the sun shine warm upon you, and the rain fall gently down.
Hello, welcome back. Today we're at week 42 of the series, and that will cover days 280 to 286. Or if you have the edition of the Road Rising that follows the calendar, then you'd be looking at October 5th to October 11th. We left our pilgrim last week quite literally in a swamp, driven there by the grief of losing his son. If he was feeling any regrets for his decision, they were cast aside by the complete debilitation he was experiencing, probably due in no small part to drinking swamp water and eating rats. Eventually, he did come to himself, following a desperate prayer which was answered immediately by a vision from God himself, and concluding with a glimpse in the face of Pastor McAllen. He had come into the swamp, found the poor pilgrim, and was now working to restore his health. Finally, the day came when the pastor suggested they move together back to the trail. Friend certainly wanted to leave that place of misery, but first he had to come to grips with the unanswered questions that drove him there in the first place. Let's read about that turning point, shall we? Day 285, October 10th. I slept through the night. The fever seemed to have run its course. My body was definitely stronger than yesterday. But still, I awoke troubled, and after a few moments remembered why. Pastor McAllen was already up and building the fire. He noticed I was awake and said, "Good morning. Ready to get out of this swamp today?" "No," I said quietly. And when he stopped to look at me, I went on, "I still have questions, Pastor. The same questions that brought me down here in the first place. I can't go back to Rendezvous with those questions unanswered." "No problem there," Pastor McAllen said, turning back to the fire. "The camp is long gone by now. They will have packed up. You won't be seeing them again for a couple of months." "But the questions," I persisted. How can you find answers down in this mud hole by yourself? Do you expect some kind of revelation to come streaking out of the sky like a bolt of lightning? Do you think if you sit here long enough eating rat and drinking swamp water that God is going to say, "Okay, he's earned a little enlightenment. Let's answer his questions"? I started to protest, but realized that was exactly what I was thinking. In my mind, God was some kind of wizard who from time to time sent his disciples out on quests. The ones who performed the best, or else suffered the most, were the ones who got ahead. Pastor McAllen could see my confusion and added, "Look, just walk with me a while, okay? We'll talk and we'll pray as we go. If you don't find what you're looking for, then I'll go on and leave you to work it out for yourself. Just give me a chance." I nodded and started to pack. I had to admit, I wasn't going to miss this camp. 1 Corinthians 1:27. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lovely things of this world and the despised things, and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. I'm sure you've all heard the proverb, right? When you find yourself in the bottom of a pit, stop digging. And I think you'll agree, this describes the pilgrim, doesn't it? His grief pushed him down the mountain, with no thought of where the trail may or may not be. He did finally come across the trail, but by that time he had become so blinded by his misery that he kept going, not stopping until he was deep in the swamp. To a person in grief, it seems the easiest thing is simply to tell him, "Stop it! Quit your wallowing and stand up." But if you've ever been that low, as I have, then you know the words come a lot easier than the actions. In the weeks and months after losing my son to leukemia, I could look at my face in the mirror and say, "You idiot, you're killing yourself. Wash your face and get back to work." But sadly, it seemed that I was physically unable to do. not those things that logic told me I needed to do. I even had a dream one night. I was down in a hole, and no one had to tell me that it was a hole of my own making. From down in the depths, I could see flashes of light up above, and I could hear sounds of people having a good time. I wanted so badly to get to my feet, call out for help, and come up out of that cold and miserable place, but it's like I was paralyzed. All I could do was whisper, "I don't want to be here." In many ways, that was the turning point in the cycle of grief that I was in. Just to recognize that I didn't want to be that way. Gradually, the desire became a prayer, and my prayer was answered. Like the pilgrim, I was unwilling to climb out of my pit until I could come to grips with the grief that had gotten me there in the first place. I was devastated. My understanding of God and His plan for my son was in shambles. I was angry, and I told God so. I refused to do anything that would resemble life as normal, preferring, like the pilgrim, to lie in a swamp and eat rats. My wife was not feeling much better. That's when we understood the facts that we had been told, that 3 out of 5 couples who lose a child will divorce. While normally we would have been trying to lift each other up, we found ourselves in survival mode. I even told Marsha one day, I said, "You know I love you, but right now I just can't be concerned with your needs. I'm just trying to survive." Well, Marsha understood, because she was feeling the same way. We even made a pact between us. We said, okay, for next year, we'll not take anything personally. And we'll say to each other, just chalk it up to grief. You know, the funny thing was that after the year was up, we decided to do it again for another year. The road out of the swamp had been there all the time, but in our grief and stubbornness, we both refused to walk it, choosing to wait until we got some answers. It took a while to realize that the answers wouldn't come until we got to our feet, cleaned ourselves up, and got back to work. That's the message this week. For all of you who are now or will one day be in a swamp of despair, have a good cry, and then look around for God's hand reaching down to lift you out. Remember those 5 most comforting words in the Bible, "And it came to pass." Y'all come back now here. I went back to my own berry picking, enjoying the satisfaction of having done a good deed for the day. Then it occurred to me, it did feel good, didn't it? As long as I was intent on getting the bird free of his misery, I wasn't thinking about my own.